Welcome to Safe Lab, School Chemical Management. My name is Dr. Laura Anderko. I'm Director of the Mid-Atlantic Center for Children's Health and the Environment and also professor at Georgetown University School of Nursing and Health Studies. Today we're going to be speaking briefly about what it takes to create a safe chemistry lab, which not only includes what to do in the lab, but information for teachers and students around safe storage and safe chemical management. Just a quick disclosure, the Mid-Atlantic Center is funded through the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, as well as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So why worry about safe labs? Although chemistry can be quite fun, it does come with some responsibilities and hazards. In 2015, there was a school near where I live, Woodson High in Fairfax, where 6 people were injured, including the teacher, when a chemistry experiment created a fire, a flash fire. There are other many examples, quite frankly, schools that we've been working with over the last couple years who have had highly hazardous chemicals stored, and some of them not stored safely. In one case last year, the public state health department had to go in immediately to remove the chemicals because of a fear of an explosion. Health and safety risks when we're working with chemicals includes the chemical's hazard level. So some chemicals are safe, some are highly hazardous, and this is related to its degree of flammability and its toxicity, and also how these chemicals interact with one another. The route of exposure is also important when we look at health and safety risks. Some chemicals are absorbed through the skin, some are inhaled, consumed, or injected. And so it's important to use protective equipment based on that route of exposure that can cause a health risk. And finally, the duration of exposure. How long were you exposed? For some chemicals, it can be minutes, for others, hours or days before it becomes a health hazard. But you really need to know what chemicals you're working with and what those risks might be. Steps to safety include knowing what chemicals are in your inventory. And this is really very much for the teacher, but also it's important for students to be aware, particularly if you're taking those chemicals off the shelf, which ones should be stored next to one another or not, which chemicals could be highly hazardous, and to establish with the classroom, teachers and students, a chemical safety plan, which should include how to store properly and to create labels that are legible and precise in what is actually in that container. So when we determine what chemical hazards exist, I can tell you that these are photographs from some of our schools that we've worked with. We need to make sure they're stored properly. Clearly, the can on the left has a chemical that is not appropriately stored. The photo on the top right has a chopped onion container that contains a type of sulfur chemical. And then on the lower right, you can see the Peter Pan jar and some other food jars. This is not proper storage. Chemicals should be stored in appropriate containers and labeled appropriately. In English, many chemicals come from countries such as China. If it's in Chinese and you don't know Chinese, then you don't know what you're working with. So make sure you know what you're working with and that it's labeled and stored properly. Establishing a chemical safety plan. All chemistry labs should have an emergency plan as well as information about do's and don'ts within the lab. Number 1 is supervision. Never work in the lab without the supervision of a teacher. Number 2 is attention. Always pay attention to the work. Don't fool around in the lab. Follow instructions. always perform experiments precisely as directed by the teacher. Emergency preparedness, know what to do in the event of an emergency. Next is labeling. This is being emphasized because it's incredibly important, and it's typically one of the least followed criteria. Make sure the labels are correct and verify before using those chemicals. Next is storing properly. We just showed you some photographs of how chemicals are oftentimes not stored properly, and that's not just the container, but that they are not mixed with chemicals that they may react with. And finally, apparel and protective equipment. Always wear appropriate protective equipment and apparel based on the chemicals that you're using. The next consideration is to make plans to dispose of unsafe chemicals. This is really the responsibility of the teacher and the school. This should actually be done by a hazardous waste management company for many of the chemicals that are often stored in chemistry labs, and those that are outdated or highly hazardous should be removed. Finally, develop a purchasing plan. Teachers can work with students to keep an inventory once a chemical has been used and completely emptied. The teacher should be informed so that there can be a checklist for purchasing. Oftentimes, chemicals can be purchased in bulk at a discount. Those chemicals tend to get outdated, and some chemicals that are older become more volatile. This is a poster that you can find on our website with our toolkit. You can see that on the bottom of the screen, kidsandenvironment.georgetown.edu/SC3. And these school chemical safety tips include posting emergency contacts in the classroom, labeling all chemicals according to the requirements of the Hazard Communication Standard, which is also in our toolkit, and keeping an inventory and updating it after all purchases and disposals. We hope you find this helpful. We hope you have a great semester in your chemistry class, and please contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.